All right, let's get fired up. If you have a Bible, go ahead and open it up. This is part 4. Now, I know this is going to be a little bit different for some of you. I mean, it's a little early. Halloween has just finished as of last week. And if you've gone to any store, you're already seeing the Christmas stuff out. Right? I mean, no, really. I mean, I went into Lowe's the other day and I was like, wow. They have literally skipped Thanksgiving and went straight into Christmas. Hey, okay, I get it. It's a marketing thing. With our sermon series, because we began going straight through the book of Luke. Okay, that's what we're going to do. So anybody ever wants to know where we're going to be, guess what? It's the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke. We're going to be there for a while. We are actually going to begin the Christmas story this morning. The very, very, very beginnings of it. The interesting part is there are so many different elements of the Christmas story that when we talk about every single element, we're still going to be going through it at Christmas time. You'll see as we begin going. Couple things real quick, okay? Couple things real quick. We have learned just a few lessons in our Gospel of Luke series, but we've already learned a ton. Let me quickly remind you of some things. It's good to constantly be reminded of some things. It is. It helps us to know. It helps us to learn. Luke was not an original disciple of Jesus. So remember that. He is a second generation Christian who comes into faith after Jesus has died and he's rose again and he's already gone back to heaven. Okay, so a lot of people, they get a little bit confused when reading through the Bible and they think that every single writer or every single book, the people were around when Jesus was. Well, that is not the case with Luke. He's a second generation Christian who comes to faith long after that. He writes, some of you know this, the most detailed account of early Christianity. He writes some of the most unique stories presented there. And you've already learned some. Last couple weeks, we talked about Zacharias and Elizabeth. Remember who they are? They're eventually going to become the parents of John the Baptist. Remember that story of how it worked out? An angel appears to Zacharias while he was in the temple and basically tells this guy who's probably in his 80s that his wife is going to have a child. And remember, he has a moment there, a crisis of belief where he can believe it, but he doesn't. And the angel gets mad. The angel's name is Gabriel and says, because of your disbelief, you are going to be mute until this happens. And so that was a couple weeks ago. We learned a lot about Zacharias. But last week, we learned a powerful message. Okay, we learned a powerful thing. There is another part of this story who wasn't present. She was not in the temple with her husband, and her name was Elizabeth. And she is also probably in her 80s and has never had a child in her whole life. And her husband comes out of that temple, and he can't speak. And so he's writing on a tablet, and he says, guess what? You're going to have a baby. And we realized last week that Elizabeth has been made fun of her whole entire life for not being able to have a baby. And so remember, we learned that brings up a lot of pain from her past. Some stuff that she had probably wanted to bury in her life years ago. And here this guy comes, even though he's supposed to be her husband, and says, hey, this is what God has said. And she's so messed up by it a little bit, right? It brings up so much emotion and so much pain that Luke tells us she hides in her house for 5 months. She doesn't want to deal with anybody. She's heard all of the drama her whole entire life. She doesn't want to deal with anybody until she actually is showing. And that's part of the Christmas story. Like, we're getting there. And we're going to learn a little bit about angels and some of the things in which they work. But there is so much here. Remember John the Baptist, for those of you that are following along and been reading the book of Luke, his job is going to be specific. He is going to be going before Jesus, preparing the way. He's going to start saying some things that the people should have already known, but they probably forgot. Now listen, again, this is going to help you with this morning. Before God does something huge in your life or huge in the world, He is going to do some things. One of the things He's going to do is He's going to tell people. When God wants to do something huge, when God's going to do something big, He likes to do some stuff. He likes to tell people. And there's a couple reasons why. Number one is so they can anticipate it. Right? They can patiently wait and anticipate this big thing that God said. Now there's another side of this. So that the person has the opportunity to use their faith. So there's a lot of people in our world, in our society, in our churches, and in our culture, in our Christianity circles that are saying, God, I want more faith. God, I want to be like some of the people I read about in the Bible. I want to have these huge moments of faith. I want my faith to be large. God will put you in opportunities at times in your life where you can exercise your faith. You will get to choose. Do I use it or don't I use it? You see, there are the two people you've heard about up until this point in time, Zacharias and Elizabeth, they both were put in situations. Now, I'm not going to say Elizabeth was 100% a doubter. The reality is she had gone through some things in her life that have made her the way she was. She didn't like being around people because people made fun of her, and we learned that words hurt. And we shouldn't speak anything unless it's, from the grace of God, because we don't want to be like the people who put Elizabeth in their house for 5 months. We don't want to say stuff to people that hurts them. They had opportunities to use their faith. Zacharias did, and he chose not to, and he was punished for it. But God still decided to use him. You're going to learn about somebody this morning that hears probably the craziest thing on the planet from an angel. And her response is going to be completely different than Zacharias and Elizabeth. 100% different. Her name is Mary, and you will learn why God chooses to use this young lady this morning. If you have a Bible, Luke chapter 1, verses 26 through 38. I did not put the verses in because it was too long for your notes. I want you to grab the Bible and I want you to see it with us. So if you go ahead and grab one of those red ones if you didn't bring it. Luke chapter 1, verses 26 through 38. Okay, before I really get started on reading, I'm going to say something. This is going to be the second time. Some of you that read the Old Testament, you know about Gabriel. He appears at least once in the Old Testament. This is going to be the second time in the New Testament within the span of about 6 months that this angel appears. And I'll tell you why here in just a second. Okay, a lot of you are interested in the angels. A lot of you. And so I'll give you a little bit on that. Okay, Luke chapter 1, 26 through 38. Now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to the city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, to the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and having come in, the angel said to her, listen to what he says. This is crazy. Rejoice, highly favored one, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women. Now listen to how she goes. But she saw him, and she was troubled at his saying, and considered what manner of greeting this was. And the angel said to her, he sees what's going on. Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bring forth a son, and you will call his name Jesus. Listen to what else he says. And he will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. And his kingdom, there will be no end. And Mary said to the angel, I don't think she has a crisis of belief here. She just wants to know how. How can this be, since I have never known a man? And the angel said to her, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the highest will overshadow you. Therefore also, the Holy One who is born will be called the Son of God. Now indeed, this is just proof, now indeed Elizabeth, your relative, has also conceived a son in her old age. And this now is the 6th month for her who was called barren. For with God nothing will be impossible. And Mary said, behold, the maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word. And the angel departed from her. Hey, what we're going to do just for a quick minute is we're going to pray. If you want to pray, you're more than welcome to pray with us. If you're not interested in praying yet, you can just check out and then check back in here in just a second. Father God, we come to you in prayer and we just thank you so much for this day. We thank you so much for you and just for this amazing story. God, I firmly believe that you're speaking over all of our lives. God, there were some, I'm just going to call them this morning, faith assignments that you have for us. Maybe we already know these assignments in our life. Maybe we're scared of these assignments. Maybe there's some things that got our mind rolling, and maybe we're even struggling a little bit like we've learned the last couple weeks. Or maybe we're just like Mary and we're like, all right. God, whatever it is, I pray that your people who are listening to you this morning will submit to whatever you speak over their life. God, I pray that I would decrease and that you would increase. That you would be seen great even in this story because it's about you. It's in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so just a little bit about Mary, okay? Let's get into this. Historically, there isn't too much that's known about her, okay? If you look up here, there's a couple things that she said, we learn about her. She was likely, right, well, she was actually raised in a lot of poverty, okay? She's not rich. I want you to grab that. A lot of people think that when God begins to move in their life, there is some social status that they have to attain first. Listen, I've heard people say, God can't use me till I get out of college. God can't use me until I'm married. God can't use me until I've raised my family. God can't use me until I first get my finances straight. Those are just excuses, right? That's just a reality of life. Those are just excuses, because sometimes we clearly know that God's revealing some things in our life. God has spoken, but we're looking at things, listen, humanistically. And we're thinking God can't because. God often shows that He likes to use people, especially in the Bible, who other people would just look over. He likes to blow humanly wisdom out of the water. Sometimes when we look at people and say God can't, that's the person who God looks at and says, that's the one I want to use. I want to use those who think they're unqualified. I want to use those who think they're unworthy. I want to use those who think that they're poor. Because in the eyes of the world, if we can do it, why do we need God? I mean, let's just be real. If we're operating in our strengths and the things we know and our abilities, all that, why do we need God? There are a lot of people who are accomplishing, listen, this isn't mean, this is just the truth. There are a lot of people who are accomplishing some things for God that is in their ability and not in God's ability and power. And they're going through life and they're saying, look what I can do, look what I can do, look what I can do. And God's over there saying, wait, you're doing all of those things without me. So you get the glory. I don't get the glory. You see the difference in Mary as we begin realizing she's raised in poverty. Poverty back then was like a really bad plague. Listen, nobody back then wanted to be poor. There was like in our culture, in our society today, if you're poor, at least you can get some food stamps and at least some housing assistance. Or if you're on the street, and listen, I'm not saying it's a good thing to be on the street, but at least there's some programs for them. Back then, if you were poor, poor. I mean, really poor. So much so that the only way that you had an opportunity to make money was either you hired yourself out as a servant or a slave, or you begged for money. I mean, that is about as poor as you can be. And so when you begin realizing Mary, she is so poor. And so when people would see her, they would look at her, and she's probably just a young lady. They would look at her and say, oh, you're poor. Don't touch me. I don't want your poor cooties to get on me. That's how insensitive sometimes people are. We think just because somebody has an issue that if we get close to them, sometimes their issues will get on us. It's absurd. She's also from Nazareth. Okay, that's not good. Which in their culture was completely insignificant. 100%. Nazareth was probably the one horse that was wore out town, if you know what I mean. There are some people in cultures and societies today, there are even some parts of the country, in our country, that you can go to that are so poverty-stricken that a lot of people don't even want to go in there. There are neighborhoods, even in Seattle, that I hear police officers tell me all the time, don't go in there. Nothing good comes out of it, right? You know, right? This is our city. We don't go in there. You know what? Nothing good comes out of there. There's always drugs, there's always problems, there's always this, there's always that. Well, Nazareth was like that back then. Everybody always looked at Nazareth and said, whoa, I don't want. Keep your stuff over there, right? Right? We understand. So you got a poor lady from the wrong side of the tracks. It is also believed at this point in time that she's young. She might be as young as 15 or 16. 15 or 16 years old is her age. She's already, in this point in time, she's already engaged to a guy, which I know a lot of people say, oh man, they married young back then. Right, real young. There wasn't long lives back then for some people. The Handbook of Bible Times is a book I read on this. It said that some girls were allowed to, by the age of 12, to marry. Completely different, right? I get it. Now we look at it like, oh, it's just completely different. She also says she's from the line of the King of David. Years and years ago, that meant something. Right? Years and years ago, that meant something. But they've been oppressed so many times since King David, since his son Solomon, since all the stuff that's happened through there. They've been oppressed so long that it actually means nothing anymore. Hey, listen, I'll tell you a quick little story. A lot of people say, oh, no, we would still hold on to that. You know, my family lineage comes from where part of my family actually owned British Petroleum. Right? So that's a big deal, right? Guess what it means to us today? Nothing. My family lost all the rights to British Petroleum during the Great Depression. So a lot of people look at that and say, wow, your family lineage, there's some big inheritance. Nah, it doesn't mean anything anymore. It was all lost during. So understand, when people see this, like they say, oh, Mary, you're in the lineage of King David. Well, hundreds of years ago it meant something. In our culture, maybe 100 years ago, it meant something. Now it doesn't mean anything anymore. As we learned in the Bible, God likes to use people that we would all bypass. Here's what happens, though. The angel comes. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about this angel because a lot of you are super interested. God sends one of his angels to talk one-on-one with Mary, and his name again is Gabriel. 3 times he appears in the Bible. We know that Gabriel is a messenger who God entrusts to deliver specific and important messages on his behalf. You see him in the Old Testament talking to Daniel. You saw him talking to Zechariah, and you see him again talking here to Mary. Gabriel's name means God is great. A lot of people seem to think that angels work outside of the perimeter of God. They don't. They are messengers specifically sent by God for a specific duty. They work on his behalf. It's completely different. We also know that they don't have free will anymore. They had a choice to choose thousands of years ago. They could choose to stay with God, or they could choose to go with this guy named Lucifer. That's the only choice they got in their whole life. Some of them chose to stay with God. Some of them chose to go with this dude named Lucifer. The ones who stayed with God are going to be his servants forever. And the book of Revelation says for eternity. That means from time past till time now, till whatever time is in the future, which eternity means there really isn't time in the future. They've made their choice. They consider it a high honor to serve God. How do we know that for sure? Some of you have learned with Zechariah. Remember Zacharias, when the angel appears in the temple, and he says, Zacharias, God has answered your prayer, and you and your wife are going to have a child. And Zachariah disbelieves. Has that moment, right? That crisis of belief. The angel looks and says, I was sent from God, and you don't believe. What that means was, Gabriel says, I was in the presence of the throne room of God. It was a high honor, a high service for me to be there. And I've been sent directly to give you this message, and you're just not going to believe it? Be mute. Don't talk. You're not going to be able to talk until your son is born. They consider it a privilege to be in the presence of God. And the book of Hebrews, some of you are big angel fans, right? They consider our faith a mystery. Listen, they look at us, Christians who love Jesus, who've never seen him. We're not Gabriel. We're not before the throne room of God. We're not in his direct presence. They look at our faith and they're like, wow, amazing that you would believe. Look at Hebrews. In this God who you've never seen. The Bible also tells us that at times angels will join worship services because they are mystified, if you will, by Christians' faith. There's your angel background. Gabriel tells Mary she is highly favored and again repeats it. Again and again. When Gabriel looks at Mary, he looks at her specifically and says, God has looked down from heaven and considers you, Mary, special. You're important, Mary. God has looked down from heaven and he does not care about your social status. He does not care that you're poor. He doesn't care that you're from the wrong side of the tracks, if you will. He doesn't care what part of the city you're from, what part of the country you're from. He looks at you and he sees something special in you. Hey, there are a lot of people in our culture and our society that think they're worthless. Right? They think they're worthless. They think that in and of themselves there's no value, there's no worth. Maybe they were told that. Right? Maybe a parent come alongside of them at some point in time and called them a worthless. Maybe they told them they never would amount to anything. And I know I'm hitting some subjects that some of you in this room have heard, okay? And I'm doing it just because some of you might have an unhealthy picture of yourself. And those words, like we've heard from last week with Elizabeth, those words have hurt. I've had people come into me and say, Pastor John, I can't do anything right. Everything I touch, it turns to poo-poo. It might, right? I've had people tell me because of their background or their ethnicity that they're worthless. And I look at them and I'm like, man, who told you just because of your skin color you're worthless? That's wrong. Right? God doesn't look at people the same way we look at people. God has always evaluated the inside. God is not concerned about the outward appearance of anybody. We do that as people. God never does that. You see, what Mary is teaching us, when God looks down from heaven, He looks at Mary and He considers her highly favored, though even though everybody else in that culture and in society would look at her and say, stay over there. Stay on your side of the town. Stay over there with the poor people, Mary. God looks down and says, you are highly favored. God sees something special in you, Mary. Hey, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to mean it with everything inside of me. When God looks down and sees every single one of you uniquely and individually, He sees something special in you. Right? If not, you would not be here on this planet or even in this room. You wouldn't. If God looked down from heaven and did not see you as unique and as special and as loved and cherished, He would have moved over. And He probably wouldn't have allowed you to be born. Study out the book of Jeremiah. And He looks down from heaven and He sees you and He says, that's mine. God loves His children. Loves them. He calls it a compassionate, unending, and cherished love. He loves you so much. It's so much higher than some of you who are parents. And I know you guys are great parents. I hope, right? You know how much you love your kids? Right? I mean, some of you would think when you talk about your kids, they're Jesus. I mean, you would think that you gave birth to the miracle. I mean, I hear some people talking about their child and they're like, my child walked in 9 months. Well, mine did, okay, but. And you brag, right? Oh, my child, that's so smart. I'm looking at them like, it's not that smart, but if you think they are. That's what we do as parents. There's pride, and it's okay. You do your thing. There's pride, right? There's pride there. You think your child walks on water. I know there's nothing they can do wrong. I get it, okay? Mine either. That's the way God looks at us. Right? He knows we do wrong, but He loves us in spite of our wrongdoings. Did you know that He will brag upon you in the throne room of God? Do you know that He loves you that much, that He cherishes what you say to Him, so much so that He saves your prayers? And they're considered vials of incense under His throne. He saves your words when you pray. That's how much He loves you. Mary did not earn the right to be selected for this honor. She didn't earn the right. She was selected because of character qualities she possessed. And God saw that she had big faith. Faith is a central theme of the New Testament. Central theme. A lot of people will say, what is Christianity all about? It's about this dude named Jesus. What else? Faith. Dude named Jesus. Death, burial, resurrection. What else? Faith. Faith. Central theme of the Bible. It's so powerful. And the volumes of faith are so loud that the book of Hebrews 11 verse 6, God says this, without faith it is impossible to please God. And it goes on to say that He will reward those who diligently seek Him through faith. Meaning you can try to please God apart from faith and you won't. That means, hey, I can inherit millions, and I could have won that lottery ticket that was all the way up to $1 billion, right? Did you guys see that? How many of you bought a ticket, right? Me neither. I didn't. Why? I don't know what I would have done with $1 billion, right? Right? And it's just that idea, man, that God selects us, and our faith is so... I got confused. I almost went off on a story that I don't want to tell. God looks at us in our faith qualities and our faith characteristics, and He says it's impossible to please Him without it. He wants us to please Him through the faith that we are expressing and having in Him. Some of you in this room are praying, God, I want to know You deeper. God, I want to know You more. God, I want to have You more evident in my life. And God's going to look at you with the most loving eyes that a father has and says, I am going to put you in situations in your life where you're going to need to exercise and use your faith. Listen, if your faith is the same as this time last year, you're probably not learning the lessons that God has for you. Because as Christians, we can't plateau and we can't stay the same. We're to be changing daily in the image of Christ. We're to be going deeper and deeper and deeper. A lot of people are saying, Pastor John, I want a big assignment from God. I want to do something huge for Him. Big assignments require big faith. They do. You want a big assignment from God. You want God to show up and do something miraculous. You want to see Him work supernaturally inside of you. Now, God can do whatever He wants. I believe that through anybody He wants. But if a Christian has the gall to pray something like that, they need to be working on their faith. They need to be constantly putting themselves in situations in their life where they need to use it. Right? How many times are we using our faith? If we're going through our life by the week or by the day or by the month or by the year without exercising and using our faith, God's looking at us and He's saying, what's going on? What's going on? Step out of your comfort zone a little bit into areas where you need to use it. You don't use it, it's not going to grow. Some of you are exercise fans. Right? And my son and I were working out. He's up there teaching junior church with his girlfriend. It's pretty good stuff. We're working out, and the idea is I don't really care anymore, right? Because I'm old, right? I don't care if I get big or little. It doesn't matter anymore. I just don't want the belly to get so big I can't see my belt anymore. Is all I care about anymore. Oh, stung, huh? I know. That's what I care about. I don't care about getting big or swole nation or any of this stuff I hear. I don't care about. The idea is we work out and we work out hard so he can get strong for baseball. Guess what? You miss a week of legs? I'm just telling you, from an old man's perspective, some of you young guys, no big deal, right? You can just step up the second week. Woohoo! Rock it out. Oh, man. I miss a week of legs. Look at some of you know, you're smiling. That second week, I'm like crying to get through the workout. Like tears coming down. In order to get big, in order to stay strong, you have to exercise even the most hated muscles, legs in the body. I hate it. Some of you exercise fans, you know, that's painful. But what's the idea is to get strong. In order to get strong, you got to work and work and work, and you have to keep advancing. That means you can't just stay at the same weight. So what? Move it up, move it up, move it up. Same with our faith. We can't stay in the same spot. You can't. It's impossible. As boring and it plateaus in your life, you begin wondering what's the meaning, what's the purpose, what's happening. A lot of people abandon God in those situations, and it's not God's fault. It's because you as an individual or that person has chose to stay in the same spot. And you stay in the same spot long enough, it does get boring. It does. So move. Go deeper. Go harder. Go further. Put yourself out there a little bit more. Here's what happens next. Mary's faith was now going to be put to the test. Here it happens. Mary hears this from God, from the angel. The angel looks at her and says, "Do not be afraid. The Lord is with you." This statement is given to Mary to reassure that she was not alone as she undertook this task ahead. Right, there are times that God gives you an assignment that scares you to death. I did not want to become a pastor. It looked at me and it scared me to death. I was a utility foreman. I didn't mind that. It was easy. You just go work with power. You boss people around. No problem. Man. pastor, preaching, studying, seminary courses. Oh! I had to be reassured that though this assignment that God was giving me, He wasn't going to leave me and say, I'm going to give you this assignment, buddy, and I'm just going to leave you to figure it out. Listen, some of you that are bosses, some of you that are in leadership in your companies, if you will, that's the worst thing you can do to an employee. The worst thing you can do. Say, here's your assignment. Figure it out on your own. And then get mad at them for not doing it right. They're going to look at you, listen, they're going to look at you and they're going to say, I tried. I did to the best of my abilities. Maybe they're going to be a little scared and not going to even talk. They're just going to look and you're going to be mad. Well, the responsibility is your fault because you didn't tell them how to do it. You gave them an assignment and you thought, oh, they got it figured out, and you just walk away from them. You just get frustrated all the time with painters. Come in and say, hey, paint the room, paint this color, do it. Come back and look at it and be like, oh, that's the most horrible thing I've ever seen. Fix it. How? They look, oh, I didn't take the time to show you. It's not your fault. You did to the best of your abilities. You didn't do it to my abilities because I didn't stick with you. I said it and left. See, the assignment that God has given Mary, He's like, the angel Gabriel looks at her and knows that she's afraid, and she's like, God's given you this assignment, but guess what? He's not going to leave you. He's not going to walk away. This is a big assignment. A big assignment calls for the action in the presence of God. He's not just going to tell you to do something. He's going to stick with you as you go through this. Because guess what? This big assignment isn't easy. It actually gets really hard for this poor little girl. Right? It actually does get did get hard for her. Why? God's assignments always cost us. Big assignments cost. Being a Christian should cost us something to be a Christian. It shouldn't be easy. It shouldn't. It shouldn't be the same as yesterday. It shouldn't be the same as last week. It should be difficult to be a Christian. When you begin studying the Bible and looking at some of the people that were presented in the New Testament, it was hard. They were socially unaccepted. They were ridiculed. They were laughed at. They were made fun of. Christians were first called Christians in Antioch in the book of Acts because people in that culture looked at them and said, ew, those are Christians. They're so much like Christ. They're disgusting. That's the real reason why the term Christianity came about, or Christians came about. Now we just wear that badge as this badge of pride. Oh, I'm a Christian. Really? Big assignments from God cost. Mary knows that this assignment from God is huge. She also knows that first no one's going to believe her. She knows everyone will doubt her. Sad part here is we'll learn from next week, Joseph could have just said, see ya. Mary would now have to face her fiancé. Can you even fathom this idea? I mean, you get to learn about him next week. She has to go to her fiancé and say, guess what? I'm pregnant. And it's not yours. Oh, whose is it? She could have said a Roman soldier and probably got away with it. Honestly, understand that culture. Right, they had the right to do whatever they wanted back then, and there's nothing a Jew could do about it. She could have said that and just scooted it under the rug. She's going to say it's God's. Show me one time in the Bible where that's happened before. There's no precedent for this story at all. So she is going to have a moment with him, and then she has to go and talk to her family. Couldn't you imagine going in as a young girl to your dad? You're only 15 or 16 years old. Pregnant. Oh, really? Whose is it? God's. What? What? Are you nuts? Oh, then there's the social pressure. Right? We get that. There's the people who are going to look in and think they know better. You know how that is. The neighbors look in your house and your neighborhood and, oh, I know better. There's people in your family who look in your family and I know better than you. Right? There's going to be the social pressure, people looking in as she begins sharing this story, because guess what? Pregnancy is not a thing you can hide. Right? You can't. At some point in time, the belly gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I think you don't even need to ask. One time, in my life, break this up with a joke, I asked the lady if she was pregnant. I said, how far along are you? She said, I'm not pregnant. I said, I'm never asking that question again. I've learned. I don't ask, right? The reality is you just can't hide it. Mary's going to begin telling people that she is pregnant from God, and the culture and that society is going to want her to be stoned because of blasphemy. Mary asks this question, how? A lot of people look at that question, they begin thinking, man, Mary's having this moment with this angel, and she's having this crisis of belief. I don't believe that. I believe that in her mind, she's beginning to think, okay, this angel is sent from God that is saying that I'm going to become pregnant. Well, it's completely impossible because I've never even been with a guy, ever. She's never even been alone in the same room with a guy. She's never even really probably been in the same room in her house with a guy, with her dad and her other family in there. A completely big no-no under that culture. So that's why she says that. She's like, oh, God's going to do this thing in you. And she's going to look and she's going to just say, well, how? How? This is what the angel says. It's not that she doesn't believe. She just wants to know. She said, the angel says this God is going to overshadow you and put His Spirit, His seed in you. And then this is the only other part she gets. She gets that, and then she gets this. Your cousin Elizabeth, which you learned about last week, is pregnant. She's 6 months pregnant, even though she's old. Listen to Mary's response. This blows my mind. Verse 38. I am the Lord's servant, Mary answered. May it be to me as you have said. The angel left. Listen, Mary got chose for this assignment because even though she asks a little bitty question, she's still going to believe that God can do it. And says, okay, if that's God's will, if that's what God wants from me, though it doesn't make sense physically, though it doesn't make sense socially, though I'm not rich, though I'm from a bad side of town, though my family lineage is kind of trashed, all right. Okay, God. The angel looks at her and he does not say what he said to Zacharias. Remember, the same angel doesn't look at Zacharias and says, because of your unbelief, you're going to be mute for 9.5 months. This tells us that the angel just leaves. He probably looks back, he's probably clapping on the way to heaven. Right on. And I bet you this angel named Gabriel begins at that moment realizing why God chose Mary. Because the situation, though it doesn't make logical sense in the eyes of God, she just says, all right. Here's the question. What's God speaking into your life that you just need to say yes to? Right? What is He speaking into your life that you know that He's clearly revealed an assignment for you, to you? Maybe He's told you this assignment 20 years ago. Maybe He's told you this assignment 30 years ago. Maybe He told it the last week and you've been looking at it. And you've been questioning back and forth. Maybe there's been moments in your life where you're just like, I just don't know. And I just don't believe. Maybe it's the time that you just back up from that and say, may it be as whatever God has said. Okay. Okay, God. All I am is your servant anyways. Right? God just wants you to say yes. Subscribe if you haven't already. Click that like button if you really did.
Hey, do you see that bell over there? If you hit that bell, you'll be notified every time we post a video on our channel.